Hey guys, it's Rue. Real quick before we start the show, I just wanted to mention I had some weird kind of popping artifacts during this episode, and I'm not entirely sure what caused them, but I'm definitely going to investigate them and make sure that that doesn't happen again next week. It's nothing terrible. I don't think it really takes away from the listening experience much at all. But you know me, I'm very big on quality, but just thought I'd mention it to you guys. It is known, and I will take care of it for next week. Thanks so much. Enjoy the show. Welcome back to the Astrocast. I'm your host, Rue. Today is Sunday, 11/3/24. New moon is finally upon us. I hope that you are getting some clear skies, because I can tell you, I am certainly not. It's been a very cloudy week here in Charlotte, North Carolina. I suppose that happens occasionally, but yeah, it is what it is. Sometimes we miss new moon, but we're getting into that time of year where the clear skies happen more and more often, which is always a good time if you ask me. Thank you guys so much for tuning in this week. I know I was gone last week, and this week's episode is definitely coming out a little bit later than normal. So I want to get you all caught up on what I've been up to. I did get a chance to do some astronomy over my vacation, which was quite nice. Although the highlight of the trip was definitely not the astronomy in this case, but visiting Salem, Massachusetts. So that was a very cool trip that me and my wife were able to take together. Just a little bit of a late celebration of our 10-year anniversary. So we've been married 10 years now. Big shout out to my wife. I definitely would not be here without her. So thank you, Jess, for everything that you do for me. So yeah, it was a fun trip. We drove up to Salem, Massachusetts. We left on a Saturday. We actually originally planned to fly into Salem, but when we went to start booking our flights a couple weeks before arriving, it was an absolute nightmare. We couldn't make the flights work unless we were willing to leave at like 5 o'clock in the morning or arrive at 10 o'clock at night. And after I was sitting there and looking at everything and then talking about renting a car because we'd have to rent a car, I just decided, screw it. Let's take an extra day. We have the whole week off. So what I said is, we're not going to drive all the way up there in one day, because if you drive straight through without stopping once, you're talking 13 hours. And nobody can do that as far as I'm concerned. We don't stop too much on road trips, but I'm not going to be able to drive for 13 hours straight. So we actually planned to kind of there's two routes that you can take if you're on the eastern seaboard and you're heading up the coast to like New York or Connecticut or Massachusetts, New Hampshire, that area. Basically, you have the city route, which takes you through all of the major cities on the eastern seaboard. Coming from Charlotte, North Carolina, that would be, you go through Raleigh, and then you head up in through Virginia, obviously. You go through D.C., you go through Baltimore, you go through Philadelphia, New Jersey, New York City, etc. And then there is the mountain route, which is, I believe, Highway 81. And absolutely beautiful, beautiful drive if you take that route. But being that we had all the devastation in Western North Carolina, we weren't very confident about, if we would run into any delays or just bad situations in general. And then also, after I realized we were going to be taking, a couple of days to get up there, I thought to myself, well, this would be a good time to visit DC and check out the Capitol. I thought that would be fun because, I'm a big historical nut, and I thought it would be fun to stop there for the night and kind of walk around the Capitol and check everything out before our whole country goes crazy before this upcoming election. So we decided to do that. And it's actually quite funny. We drove in, and I thought that I'd already picked out a hotel that was kind of just outside of DC. And I thought that I had put that in my GPS. It turns out I had not updated it. So it literally took us to whatever Google considers to be the very center of DC. So I'm like driving around. I got to use the bathroom, and I'm in a roundabout in the middle of, literally a roundabout in the smack middle of DC, right next to like the Capitol and the big, yard. I can't remember the name of it, in front of the George Washington Monument. And I'm sitting here looking around, and there's like the Australian embassy, and I'm like, why would our hotel be here? And then I finally realized what I had done. So the hotel was 40 minutes away, which was very, very fun when I really had to go to bathroom, but there was nowhere to stop. So I just, dealt with it. We drove the 40 minutes. We got to the hotel, and once we got there and we sat through all this traffic getting out of DC, I thought it wouldn't be too bad, but it was. It was bad, that area that we ended up picking. When you're traveling to places you've never been, obviously I know that DC and Baltimore is not the safest area depending on where you go. But I looked up to see, crime rates in the area before picking that hotel, and they were low. But when we got there, not so much. The lobby had bulletproof glass, like you couldn't even get physically near the hotel attendants. And it was pretty rough. The area was, there were dudes selling drugs right outside of the hotel, literally standing there, slinging dope on the side of the road. So once we got all of our stuff out of the car and inside the hotel, we locked the door and did not go back out. So that was a little bit of a shame, because I really was looking forward to seeing some of DC, but I was able to, circle the Capitol in the very middle and then drive out. So that's kind of fun. So we left very early the next morning. Neither of us slept very well. We headed up to Salem. We got there, I think it was around 6 or 7 o'clock at night. We kind of took our time. It's a beautiful drive once you get through New York and everything and get into Connecticut. That drive through Connecticut, when you're just going up and down the mountains, and the fall leaves were changing. And I think we came like during the peak season of the color change, which was just incredible. I've never seen colors like that on trees before. It's something special up there that you guys have if you're in that area. And this is coming from someone who visits the Blue Ridge Parkway pretty regularly in North Carolina, but it was different up there is the best way I can describe it. So we got into Salem, and the first night was very hectic. We only had one thing planned, and that was a ghost tour that I had pre-purchased tickets for ahead of time. And apparently the area where the ghost tour met up was like the most touristy part of Salem. And when me and my wife were kind of walking through and seeing like just kids partying everywhere and loud bass and like just not my scene at all. Like maybe 25 years ago, definitely my scene, but not today as an adult. And I was like, oh gosh, did we make a huge mistake coming here? But luckily that was not the case. It was a beautiful place. And once we kind of got outside of the little tourist area and started seeing the real Salem, it was quite beautiful. And we were able to visit all the historical areas. We saw all the Hocus Pocus filming locations, which was pretty cool. We got photos in front of all of them. If you want to check them out, they're on my Facebook page. Feel free to give me a follow over there. And I'll say 3 days is what we spent in Salem. We did stay actually in Salem in the historic area. If you ever go, I highly recommend that you stay in Salem proper. It might cost a little bit more, but the parking situation up there is crazy. Like if you can find a parking spot, you are very lucky. So I would not want to deal with the stress of like driving into Salem, finding a spot, going out for the day. And then like for me personally, I like to go home for a couple of hours and, take a nap, take a shower, whatever, freshen up, relax, and then go back out for the evening stuff. You can't really do that if you're not staying in the town. So we did do that. I'm very glad we did. We found a parking spot when we first arrived, and I don't think we moved our car once the whole time we were there, because it's just such a walkable town. We did take a couple of Ubers to some of the areas that were slightly more off the beaten path for photography locations. They have a very, very pretty wharf there. I got up the second morning that we were there and photographed the sunrise and just got some breathtaking photos there. The only thing that was a shame, though, is the whole town was just full of those obnoxiously bright LED lights. I mean, I figured, I would be able to see some stars while I was there. Not much, though, not much at all. I think when I got out to the wharf and I got up I want to say I got up around 4:30 and headed down there because I wanted to, capture the actual entire sunrise from start to finish. Orion was up. I could see Orion pretty well, but, that was at 4:30 in the morning and on literally the edge of the city, but couldn't see it great. And there were a lot of those bright LEDs just off the wharf behind me where I was standing. So that's a little bit of a shame, but unfortunately that's to be expected pretty much anywhere you go these days. I just wish that we would have maybe thought a little bit harder before introducing these LED lights. I understand that they're a lot more power efficient, and I am a guy who very much cares about the environment and doesn't want to be wasteful in any way. But I'm sure we could have done a better job than the incredibly broad range spectrum lights that we have in current day LEDs. And I'm hoping at some point we'll collectively decide as humanity to correct that decision, but we'll see. So anyway, we spent 3 days in Salem. It was awesome. We did a lot of fun things there. I had the best breakfast sandwich I've ever had in my life. There's a place called Crave up there, Crave. Shout out to those guys. That was awesome food. I think that was probably the best thing that I ate while I was there. And we went to some fancy restaurants too. So that was very cool. They had an amazing comic book and toy store there. So just lots and lots of collectibles in that shop. They must have been collecting for years to get the collection that they had in there. It was unreal. Just an absolutely huge comic book and toy store. So right up my alley in that regard. And like I say, 3 days was plenty of time. So if you ever decide that you want to do the Salem trip, highly recommend going in the fall. It was busy, but we went on, we got there Sunday night, we stayed Monday night and Tuesday night, and then we left Wednesday morning. So we were there, 3 nights or Sunday night, Monday, Tuesday, 3 nights, 3 days. And I think that was the perfect amount of time. We wouldn't have needed to stay another day. We were able to see everything in those 3 days. So we did walk a lot. We walked a whole lot, probably 5 to 10 miles a day easily. We got a lot of steps in, so that was good. A lot of good exercise on the trip as well. I won't bore you with the details of coming home too much, but just so you know, we took the mountain route home because we didn't want to go through the city and get stuck in the traffic in Manhattan and all that like we did on the way up. And that was a beautiful drive again, going through the mountains the whole time. The mountains in Pennsylvania in particular this time of year, just absolutely beautiful. We stayed at this really cool hotel. It was actually what was it? It was a Wyndham hotel, I guess. It's one of the ones that I've stayed at many times. I have like a member number at that hotel and we get perks or whatever. We had a suite there and it was a super nice hotel and the area was like night and day different from what we saw when we were in DC area. And I think it was called Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, if I'm not mistaken. It was a really nice little town, and it was cool because the area that the hotel was in was right in the middle of this like massive shopping center that had like everything you could think of. I mean, as far as like restaurants, coffee, ice cream, pet stores, Target, gas stations, everything that you could possibly want was right in that area. So that was a cool place to stop for the night on the way home. Me and Jess went and got Chick-fil-A, and then we got ice cream afterwards over at Brewster's. We just walked down and got that, which was cool. And the hotel was so much nicer. God, it was night and day. We paid less for that hotel too than we did for the bulletproof glass one in Baltimore. So anyway, that was an awesome trip. We got home Thursday. completely exhausted. I was wiped out for a couple of days after getting back. The Friday night after we got home, so last week's Friday, I was able to actually make it out to the observatory. So that was really cool. I was able to see our friends at Dark Dragons Astro while I was there. Shout out to Jeff and Rick from Dark Dragons Astronomy. We were able to catch up. Rick, as you know, if you're a longtime listener of the show, is actually the director for the Charlotte Observatory for the Charlotte Astronomical Society. And we caught up with him. They have some very big stuff in the works. Like, I'm talking game changing type stuff. They can't talk about it yet. They told me a little bit about it. I'm not going to share their business, but highly recommend that you keep up with them if you ever want to check them out. Like I say, they are great friends of the show, and you can find them at darkdragonsastro.com if you ever want to check them out. Right now, they are specializing in roll-off roof systems for observatories. And I'm not talking, tiny observatories. They can do, huge buildings. They've done university grade scientific projects for roll-off roofs. They also have a light panel, and they build everything in-house. Like, they design and build everything from scratch. So you're talking really nice custom work. So if you ever need anything done with your observatory, I would highly recommend checking them out because the work that they do is incredible. They also actually have an app on the iPad, which is super cool. If you look up Dark Dragons Astro on the App Store, they have a flat panel app. So it's, your basic flat panel app, but it's specialized to work, for astronomy, makes it highly customizable. You can select how bright or dark you want it to be, et cetera, et cetera. So check that out if you ever want a really good app for flat panel work while you are out in the field. So while I was there, I ran into quite a few friends. You make a lot of friends when you join your local observatory. And that is one of the reasons I am a big time believer in joining your local club, because you really can meet a lot of cool people. It's hard to find people who are also into astronomy in the real world. A lot easier to find them online, through the podcast. Obviously, I meet a lot of awesome people, but physically meeting up with people, there's no better way to do it than joining your local club. So I saw a friend, Ayush, out there and got to hang out with him. His friend Misha was joining him. He was actually out taking his very first astrophotography image, which was super cool. So he had recently gotten into photography, and he had a Canon R7, and he had the kit lens, the 18-150 lens that comes with the R7. And I loved that because that was my first mirrorless camera as well. I still have and absolutely love my R7. It's a great camera. And I was able to kind of show him the ropes, so to speak. And between me and Ayush, we were able to help him quite a bit. And I actually let him borrow, I'll tell you about what I shot later, but I let him borrow my 100-400 RF lens, which is an awesome lens. I use it for wildlife primarily. But the 150 lens that he was using, he wanted to be able to get a closer view of Orion, which was his target, which, I mean, honestly, this time of year, I think that would be everyone's first choice for their first astrophotography target. And that 150 millimeters of reach just wasn't quite enough to get him where he wanted to be. So I let him borrow my lens. He had actually never taken his lens off his camera, so he wasn't sure how to do it yet. So I showed him how to do that. I told him all about the settings on the camera and, what you want to set this to and that to, and that sort of thing. And he actually took it down to one of the very large telescopes that we use for planetary imaging there. And he piggybacked on top of that. So they had that telescope trained on Orion, and he just literally put his camera on top of this giant telescope that they had rolling, and was able to photograph Orion for, I think he got a good couple hours out of it. And a couple days later, Ayush sent me the image, and wow, it came out really, really good. I was definitely impressed, and I was laughing because I was thinking to myself, man, my first image that I ever took was also of Orion. And boy, oh boy, did he blow mine out of the water. Mine was it was a picture of Orion that I took through my Newtonian telescope A go-to Celestron 130 Astromaster, I think is it. But, you know, they're a 130 newt that Celestron makes. And I just basically I think I had a 30 millimeter eyepiece or a 10 millimeter eyepiece in it. And I just put my cell phone right up to the eyepiece and snapped the photo. And I was completely blown away by it, you know, just being able to get that. And it's funny because looking back now, you know, years later, it's just, we come so far in such a short period of time in this hobby. And when I look back over my old photos, I'm just kind of amazed at the progress that I make each and every year. I mean, if I just looked at stuff that's just 2 years old, I'm like, wow, I was missing this, that, and this, and da 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 da. And just like my processing has gotten so much better. And it's very few hobbies do you see quite as much growth as you do in photography and astrophotography on such a regular, you know, consistent basis. You can just see yourself growing the more time that you put into it, which is really, really one of the things that I truly love about astronomy and astrophotography. So as I promised last week before we left, I told you we were going to have an astrophotography centric episode this week, and we are indeed going to have that. But before, I thought a good lead in to that discussion would be a question that we received from one of our listeners. And he's actually joined our Patreon. And if you would like to support the show, you can do that at patreon.com/the Astrocast. And that will give you access to our members only Discord, where we often talk about all things astronomy and astrophotography and chit chat about this and that and life in the third. But anyway, Martin, thank you so much for supporting the show and joining the Patreon. And he did actually send me a question, and I saw it, and I've got a habit of writing people back and immediately answering their questions, which of course I love to do whenever someone asks a question. But I thought to myself, you know, I ask so often for people to send questions into the show. And I told Martin, I said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to answer your question, but let me answer it on the podcast so it can be more off the cuff, and it'll give us a good little starting off point for our discussion on astrophotography. So Martin is from Hull, England, and he writes in, he says, "Hello, Rue. I am just starting out in astrophotography and only have a basic setup. I have a Canon 2000D, that's a Rebel T7 here in America, with the standard kit lens, 18 to 55 millimeter, and he also has the telephoto kit lens, which is 75 to 300. And he has a nifty 50 as well. Says he took a few shots last year after getting his Skywatcher 2i. He recently stumbled upon the Astrocast on Spotify, and it has inspired him to get back out there and try again. Do you have any advice for a novice like me?" So thank you so much for writing in, Martin. I really appreciate that more than you know. And yes, I do actually have quite a good bit of advice for you, in fact. And let's start with your camera. So the Rebel T7 is actually a camera that I also own. I have the T5. So I have the slightly older model. I can't even remember if there was a T6. I assume there was, but I have the T5 model. I don't know. I assume you don't have the T7i because I figured you would have mentioned that. But I mean, I'm going to work with what you have, obviously, but I would like to mention, if anyone is buying, you know, an entry model DSLR, if you can go for the I model, just because it has the screen that pops out and swivels around, which is huge. Then again, with the T7, perhaps they started including that standard. Let me check real quick. Okay, no, it does not have the standard fold-out screen, but that's not the end of the world. It does make things a little bit easier, but it's certainly not something that you absolutely have to have. And then you also have a very good star tracker in the Skywatcher 2i. So a couple of things that I would suggest. So first of all, I hope that you have a very good tripod for your Skywatcher. I don't know, you didn't mention if you have the one that they sell specifically for the Skywatcher, but if you do, that's already a great start, because you want to have a great tripod. That's one of the things that people tend to skimp on when they're first getting into photography, and oftentimes astrophotography, but a really good tripod will make your life so much easier, particularly with a star tracker, because they need to be, you know, really solidly on point whenever you start actually working with them to do polar alignment. For example, you want to have it nice and steady, and then you don't want it moving around when you go to actually put your camera on, which most of the time happens after you do the polar alignment. So my first couple suggestions are going to be about polar alignment. And for me, one of the issues that I ran into with the built-in scope on my Skyguider Pro, which is Ioptron's version of the Sky Watcher, was I had a hard time actually getting on my knees to do polar alignment. So I have bad knees. I've had them, God, since my 20s, and that's something that was very difficult for me. But there is an excellent tool that you can purchase for just $15, $20 that can remedy that for you. You can buy a right angle eyepiece that connects directly to your polar alignment scope on your Skywatcher, and that can actually remedy and make it a lot easier to do your polar alignment. For me, it was like a lot of trouble trying to do polar alignment before I got that device, and now it's pretty darn easy, to be honest with you. So also another thing I want to reiterate to you about polar alignment that you may or may not be aware of is if you're using a very wide angle scope, lens in your case. So say, for example, your 18 to 55 millimeter lens. If you had that down on the very wide angle side, which would be the 18 millimeters, your polar alignment is going to be a lot more forgiving than it would be on something like a 300 millimeter zoom lens. So the wider you go, I'm not going to say the less important polar alignment is, because polar alignment is definitely still important with a 18 millimeter lens, but the more forgiving it is. So if you're not 100% spot on with your polar alignment, you're probably not going to notice on a, let's say, 30-second exposure at 18 millimeters. Whereas if you're, let's say, 5 minutes off on your 5 arc minutes off on your polar alignment at 300 millimeters, you are definitely going to notice, because once you're zoomed in that much further, the stars appear to be moving faster, and therefore you can get star trails. So I would say definitely work on your polar alignment. There are a lot of different tools out there that you can use to do polar alignment. Obviously, Polar Clock is a really simple free application that you can download from your app store, and it will show you exactly where you need to put Polaris on the little clock image that you see when you look through your polar alignment scope. And that's something that I use every time that I go out with my Skyguider Pro, which is a device that I absolutely love to use, because even though I have, awesome CM26 mount and ASI Air and all that, my personal favorite astrophotography is the really simple stuff. Like, I love just getting a camera on a tripod and seeing, what kind of beautiful images I can get. So definitely take your time with the polar alignment. Another thing that I could highly recommend investing in would just be a laser pointer. You would be amazed. I was kind of shocked at how well a laser pointer can work when you're doing polar alignment, if you're doing wide angle shots. So what I mean by that is if you attach a laser pointer to your Star Adventure, or I'm sorry, your 2i. I keep thinking about it is Star Adventure. Sorry. Anyway, ignore me. If you attach it to your 2i and then turn the laser pointer on and point it directly at Polaris, and you're accurate with that pointing and, adjusting the star tracker so it is pointed directly at that. And what a lot of people actually do is they will physically remove the polar scope from their star tracker and then just replace it with a laser pointer. I haven't gone that far. I have an actual Vixen clamp that I can attach to the Skyguider Pro and then use that to point the laser pointer at it. And that makes it really easy to get a quick polar alignment that otherwise you would have to spend a lot more time doing. So if you know that you're going to be doing really wide field shots for the night, like let's say you're only going to use your 50 millimeter lens or the 18 to 55, then I would say use that laser pointer, get that on top of your 2-eye, however you decide to do that. Even if it's just literally taping it down and then, pointing it directly with your polar alignment at Polaris, and you'll be amazed at how well that works. I was blown away. I was like, man, why wasn't I doing this years ago when I figured out how simple that was to do? It's like I say, it's not as accurate, obviously, as using polar clock and looking through your polar scope and aligning Polaris, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're doing very wide field shots and they're only, 30 seconds, it will work perfectly for you. So definitely, look into getting a laser pointer. It doesn't have to be a super expensive one. I will say be very, very aware of local laws in your area and never fire up a laser pointer into the sky if you see that there is a plane anywhere in the vicinity of where you're looking towards Polaris. So just be aware of that. Not legal advice, to be clear, but I would hate for anyone to get in trouble for pointing a laser pointer in the sky because I told you it was great for polar alignment. So just be aware of that. Use common sense. Laser pointers go very, very, very far. And I've heard horror stories about people pointing them at planes or, pilots thinking they were being funny. And then the feds come knocking on their door the next day. So they tend to figure things out when people do that. So just use your wits and you will be fine in that regard. And the other advice I would highly recommend would be to look into getting a clip-in light pollution filter. So there are some really, really good ones out there, and they actually make more now than whenever I first got started a few years ago for cameras like yours. But the one that I would actually recommend would be the same one that I bought for my Rebel T3i years ago when I got started, and that would be the Astronomic CLS Canon clip-in filter. And just make sure you get the one that specifically fits the Canon Rebel, because they do make some other versions that are for their full frame cameras or like the R series mirrorless cameras, but they still absolutely make the regular EOS version for your Canon Rebels. And that is an excellent tool for reducing light pollution. If you're like, 90% of people and live in an area that has less than optimal sky conditions as far as darkness, that can greatly reduce light pollution in your images. So especially if you're, just kind of getting started, it's hard to appreciate the hobby if you can't make it out to dark skies on a regular basis. And if that is the case, like most of us, you're not using a modified camera yet, so that light pollution will just wreck your nebulosity. So something like a clip-in filter is great because it works with all your lenses as opposed to, filters that go on the outside of the lens. It'll depend on the, size filter that you need, et cetera. But the clip-in filters go behind the lens. So they go right in front of the sensor. And then you put your lens on. So it literally goes, before the lens, and it filters out a lot of the light pollution and gives just excellent results. So again, that's the Astronomic CLS clip-in filter for the Rebel T7. So I would definitely recommend checking that out. I would also say, if you can, try to take a trip out to some dark skies. Dark skies are so much better than our typical suburban light polluted skies. Even if you can only, let's say you're in a Bortle 7 and you can make a trip out to a Bortle 4, that is a huge difference in terms of sky quality, especially this time of year while the Milky Way is still out early in the evening. You'll be able to really, really appreciate the stars a lot more when you get out to an area like that is much darker. As far as other things that you could purchase to make your life a little bit easier, I would highly recommend a dummy battery. So essentially it plugs in to your battery area on your camera, but it actually has an AC adapter that comes with it. So if you have an extension cord, for example, and you're imaging in your backyard, you can plug that battery into your camera and then, run that to a mains power line, and you don't have to worry about your battery dying on you, which is very, very nice. particularly if you spend a lot of time polar aligning and getting everything set up just right. It stinks whenever your battery and your camera dies, and then you got to kind of take your rig apart and swap that battery out. If you use a dummy battery, that's one less thing that you have to worry about throughout the night. Whenever I was first getting started, that was like kind of a breakthrough thing for me, having a dummy battery. It made a huge difference. So that and, using a laptop, if you can introduce a computer into the process, it can really make a huge difference in terms of your ability to capture. And we're going to talk about a lot of different software today, because I'd like to spend some of our time going through the various software that I use. But when I was getting started and had a very, very similar setup to yours, a couple of things that I ran on a regular basis were the old APT, which is astrophotography tool. And that is just a super simple tool that you can use to plug USB into your camera and then run that to your laptop. And then you can tell it, okay, I want to take a 60-second exposure at this ISO, and then just press start. And you can say, I want to take that 10 times, and APT will do it for you automatically. So that is very, very cool. If you're using like a, less automated setup, I guess you could say, not a go-to mount and all the, fancy stuff, APT is super simple and a very good tool to use. And then I would highly recommend Stellarium. Stellarium is something that I talk about all the time on the show, but there is a reason for it. It is an excellent piece of planetarium software with just so many plugins. You can really get lost in it. You can actually set up your own custom landscape in it. So that way, if you've got, like me, trees in certain parts of your yard that go up, 20 degrees into the sky, depending on where you're looking, you can actually set it up to be similar in Stellarium. So that way, if you're making a plan for a target that you want to shoot, you'll know exactly, when it's going to be over the tree line and for how long, and, those sorts of things. So definitely would recommend checking out Stellarium. So that in combination with APT, if you could, bring a laptop with you, have a little folding table, makes a huge difference. Having a chair and a folding table while you're out imaging makes just a huge difference. Being able to sit down and think and work makes all the difference in the world, instead of standing there and fumbling with a laptop or a tablet. That can really make things better for you. And then if you're going to do that, get a chair and a table to work in. I would just use a 4-foot basic folding table, like the, plastic folding table with the folding legs underneath. I would always get one of those giant Tupperware containers, like the kind that you store things in. They're extremely popular for astronomers and astrophotographers, because you can then put your laptop or tablet inside of that and kind of put a towel over it. And that does a few different things for you. If you're in an area with other astronomers, your laptop's light won't bother them nearly as much. B, it keeps dew from forming on your laptop throughout the night, because it's in a covered area, so that dew isn't falling on it all night long. And it makes things a little bit easier. So, getting one of those big Tupperwares and then putting your laptop inside of that on top of the table is a great way to go. You want to make sure that you've got, plenty of cables. Anytime that I go out in the field, like I'm not going to be at home and I'm out, doing astronomy in the field, I generally speaking will bring my little box of astronomy cables with me. And I've got, lots of various, power cables, USB-C cables, micro, mini USB, just stuff I've collected over the years that way I know if something happens with one of my cords out in the field, I've got a replacement or a backup that I can use in that box. So that's something that also helps quite a bit. The specific lenses that you have, Martin, I would recommend starting with the 18 to 55 or the 50 millimeter. The 50 in particular, I know you said you had a 50, and usually 50s tend to have a very wide aperture. So if it is like a f2.0 or maybe even a f1.8 50 millimeter lens, that's going to be able to suck up a lot of light really quick. And I'm sure you'll notice with the kit lenses, the 18 to 55 and the 75 to 300, those have higher F values on them. If you look at them, I believe it's like a 5.6 on the 75 to 300. Let me check. All right, so the 75 to 300 is F4 to 5.6, which actually isn't that bad at all. And then the 18 to 55, I believe that's a little bit faster. Yeah, it's F4 to 5.6. So basically what that means is, technically speaking, your 18 to 55 can gather light a little bit faster whenever it's at the shorter length of the zoom. So at the 18 millimeter at F4, that's going to gather the most light. But again, if you have a 50 millimeter prime lens, that's likely f1.8 or 2.0, maybe 2.8. But it'll gather a lot more light a lot quicker. So I would definitely play around with that 50 millimeter lens. The beauty of that too is it's an awesome focal length to use on targets like Orion this time of year. So if I were you personally, what I would do is I would try to find a dark sky site that's not too terribly far away. I would get I try to get a dummy battery. You know, you got a couple of ways you can go. Obviously, if you use a dummy battery when you're out in the field, you obviously need something to plug it into. One thing that astrophotographers often invest in relatively early on is a power pack. A lot of people will actually build their own out of marine deep cycle batteries. I bought one of the Amazon ones that basically gives you 2 AC outlets and a bunch of USB ports, and it's great because it can run 2 of my rigs all night long, no problem, and still have change left over. But if you use the dummy battery, and you're somewhere that does not have power, you'll want to make sure that you have something like that that can run the camera for you. Otherwise, just make sure you have 2 or 3 batteries when you go out, because they won't last forever if you're doing long exposures over and over again. Another thing, small thing that you can invest in that will make a huge difference is just an intervalometer. That allows you to actually set the number of shots and the length of exposure that you would like to take for your shots. But I will say, if you're using a laptop, you don't really got to worry about an intervalometer, because the various tools that are available, such as APT that I told you about earlier, can do the work of the intervalometer for you. So if you want to use a laptop, make sure that you download a tool like APT before you go out. If you don't want to use a laptop out in the field, then I would definitely purchase an intervalometer. And really the easiest way to do this, if it's me, if I'm at home, I'm going to use my laptop. If I'm going out to a dark sky site somewhere and I don't have a big battery pack that I'm bringing, I'm probably just going to bring an intervalometer to simplify things. And at the end of the day, once you get home, you can absolutely, review the images in the exact same way that you would regardless. So you're still making the same captures, just how you go about doing it is really the only big difference. I will say the APT is, in my opinion, a little bit easier to use. I guess it kind of depends on the intervalometer that you get. Some of them can be a little bit tricky, but if you look them up online, usually you can find a pretty good guide for how they work. Another thing you're definitely going to want to invest in is going to be a dew heater. That is very, very, very important to have, especially this time of year in the Northern Hemisphere, because we get a lot of dew at night. The water that tends to fall on everything outside. Well, I made the mistake when I was at the observatory last week capturing images in a very similar way to what we're talking about right now, of forgetting to put my dew heater on my Canon R5, which was shooting with what lens was I using? I was using my Rokinon 16 or 14 millimeter f2.8 lens, which is my Milky Way lens for the Rokinon lens, it's an awesome lens, but I didn't get any good shots out of that because I forgot to put the dew heater on. The lens fogged up, it got dewy, and then basically all of the images were unusable. So if you don't have a dew heater, just remember to wipe your lens off very, very frequently. But unfortunately, that's going to shake the lens and it'll ruin whatever sub you're taking at the time. Whereas, a dew heater, you can just literally go to Amazon and search for camera lens warmer or dew heater, DEW. And you can buy one for 15, 20 bucks. And they sell them in a couple different power sources. I use the USB ones personally because, again, I've got USB battery packs and everything. They also sell 9-volt ones that are made more specifically for astrophotography setups, so they can be, plugged into an ASI Air or that sort of thing. But definitely invest in a dew heater as well. It will make your life infinitely easier. So yeah, find dark skies, bring your tripod, bring your Star Adventure. If you got a laser pointer, bring that with you so you can do a quick polar alignment. Definitely consider that 90-degree adapter for polar alignment if you don't want to go the laser pointer route, or get both. They're very, very inexpensive. So you could do that. And I would definitely, take your time doing your polar alignment. And I assume you have a ball head. I guess we haven't talked about that yet, but a ball head is a very, very important tool to have. If you're using something like a 2i, that is what actually allows you to position your camera wherever you want. Whenever I first got into astrophotography and learned about a star tracker, I was really confused because I was looking at it and I saw, how you would attach your camera to the declination bracket. But I said, okay, but that only really allows me to look at the northern part of the sky. How do I turn the camera around? And then I found out about ball heads. So a ball head obviously is something that you can screw directly onto your star tracker, and then it'll allow you to reverse the camera in a different direction and then clamp it down so it doesn't move. That is something worth spending a few bucks on. Make sure you get a very good high quality ball head that is rated for way more weight than you'll ever use. So ball heads are one of the things I don't mind spending a little bit of money on, because having something that I know is going to support my, depending on the night, $3,000+ worth of camera gear that's sitting on top of a star tracker is very, very much in my best interest. So get yourself a good ball head. You can go to Amazon for that. You can go to High Point Scientific. They sell some very good ones. Ioptron makes an excellent ball head. If you do go to High Point Scientific for any of this stuff, remember that we are partners with High Point, and I will put a link in the show notes where you can actually go there. And if you purchase something through that link, it's the same price as you would pay just going directly to their website, but they will send a small commission to the Astrocast, which definitely helps the show. So yeah, after you've got all that, man, just like I say, go out to a dark field somewhere, polar align, get your 50mm lens. I would point it right at Orion's belt personally. And then I would probably do, depending on how good your polar alignment is, I would probably start with 30-second exposures at ISO 1600 to 3200. And, that can vary wildly from sensor to sensor and camera to camera, but I'd probably start somewhere in that range. And then, if you notice 0 star trails after focusing, it's another thing. Take your time focusing. A Batinov mask can be a hugely great tool to have. If you have a 3D printer, you can print one. If you don't, you can buy one online for $10, and it's basically a small cap that you put on the end of your lens, and it creates light diffraction patterns, which you can turn your lens focus barrel until those diffraction patterns are exactly parallel to one another. It like basically makes an X across the star. And once it's perfectly evenly spaced, you know that you're perfectly focused. If you don't have a Batinov mask, though, not the end of the world. Just, go to your preview screen and get the stars as small as possible. Take your time doing that. Focus is very important. And if you mess up the focus and then take photos all night, you're going to be super disappointed when you get home and you're like, oh man, all of these are out of focus. And even though we have software that's really good at correcting stuff like that, it's not cheap software. So if you don't already have it, that can really, really ruin your fun. I've had that happen a few times over the years where I've missed focus early on in the evening and never corrected it. Also, remember, anytime that you adjust your focal length on your lens, you need to refocus. So that's another mistake that I've made out in the field. That's why I'm telling you about it. So point that 50mm at Orion's belt. You should be able to get the Orion Nebula. You'll be able to get the Horsehead and Flame Nebula at that focal length. And really, you should be able to get some of Barnard's Loop, which is the really beautiful red nebulosity that kind of circles around Orion. And that would be really cool. I'm a big fan of getting really wide photos of the stars, like getting entire constellations. And this time of year, man, you will not find a better one than Orion to photograph at that focal length. So that would be my advice to you, Martin. I hope that that helps somewhat. Thanks so much for writing into the show. If any of you guys have a question, please feel free to email me at ruastrocast@gmail.com, and I will do my best to read your question and answer it on the show. So thanks so much again, Martin, for writing in. So back to astrophotography software. We kind of touched a little bit on that in my answer to Martin for getting started. We were talking about APT and Stellarium, and I thought it would be fun to also today just do a little bit of a software check on my machine and let you guys all know all of the software that I currently have installed, what I use each piece of software for, and what I often don't use, just to give you an idea for me personally. And then hopefully, if you don't have any of these, or if you're getting started, perhaps they would be worth checking out. I will tell you up front, a lot of the apps that I had heard about many times and never actually went to try because I kind of rolled my eyes and said, I got PixInsight. It's the best of the best. That couldn't be good. Have really surprised me. Apps like Sequitur in particular for Milky Way shots are just absolutely incredible. And what you'll find is that while for, deep space photos, PixInsight is just impossible to beat as far as I'm concerned. Once you start getting to the really wide field stuff or planetary imaging, some of the other software can be very, very, very good, and in a lot of ways better than PixInsight, depending on the use case. So I just want to go over some of those. I mentioned PixInsight, obviously, so let's start there. PixInsight is kind of the gold standard for astrophotography. For deep space photos, it truly can't be beat. It's a little expensive, no doubt about it. At $250, it is a very expensive piece of software. That being said, it is the best of the best. It's what NASA uses for processing their images. So that kind of says it all as far as I'm concerned. And something that always surprises me is when you see somebody who's brand new to astrophotography and they've gone out and they've built just an incredible rig, and then you see them struggling mightily with something like Cyril. And I'm not saying that to talk down to Cyril or anything like that. It's an excellent program, and if you use Cyril, you probably love it. It's great. But what surprises me is that they're willing to spend as much money as they are on their rig, but then they don't want to spend any money on their post-processing software, which really, once you start getting into astrophotography, you're going to quickly learn that, 70 to 80% of the work that we do for astrophotography is in the software. Don't get me wrong. It's super fun going outside to capture. And it's my favorite part of the hobby, no doubt about it, being under the stars, looking at a nebula, seeing the images come in. It's my favorite part. But most of the time is actually spent processing. When you're out in the field, you kind of, if you're like me, everything's automated after you get it set up and it just kind of runs and does its thing. And then I just sit back and enjoy the stars. That is not the case when you're editing photos. So, $250, again, seems like a lot, but it's the best software that there is. So I would highly encourage anyone who has spent, $3,000 or more on their, first setup to really look into PixInsight. It's got a learning curve. There's no doubt about it. But it's not as bad as it looks. When you first open up PixInsight, it's super duper confusing and you're like, where do I even start with this? But the software has been around long enough now that there are excellent guides to be found everywhere. YouTube is just a perfect resource for this. So any feature that you want to learn about in PixInsight, just go to YouTube and search for PixInsight, whatever you're looking for, PixInsight stacking photos, and you will find 10 different guides that you can use to learn how to stack photos in PixInsight. So it is, speaking of hardware that is utilizing PixInsight, it's extremely CPU bound. So if you're a computer person, you know that some software is heavily utilizing your CPU, and then some software will heavily utilize your graphics card or GPU. PixInsight is kind of notoriously CPU bound, although there are certain plugins like Star Exterminator that finally use GPUs. And if you have an NVIDIA graphics card, it can greatly reduce the time of things like Star Exterminator and Blur Exterminator. And there are guides online that you can find to utilizing the GPU in PixInsight. So if I was building or buying a new computer today, I would definitely go with, one of the newer processors. So like Intel right now is on 14th gen. So I would say go 13th or 14th gen. I'm a big fan personally of buying one generation behind for processors. I'm actually a Ryzen guy. I haven't built an Intel machine in years. So I'm on the AMD side when it comes to CPUs. And for that, I would say a Ryzen 7 or a Ryzen 9 if you've got the money. Ryzen 9's killer. Ryzen 7 is kind of like the best hobbyist machine grade, I would say, CPU. And then Ryzen 9, you kind of get into that prosumer level right before you get to their Threadripper series, which is just like a whole different beast. But they do have a new one coming out very soon, the Ryzen 7 9800X3D, which is going to have 3D Vcache built into it, which is going to be huge. And I'm wondering if that's going to be a big boost for PixInsight. I guess we'll have to kind of wait and see. If I were going to go Intel, I'd go, like I say, 13th or 14th generation, either an i7 or an i9 if you can afford it. I would recommend 64 gigabytes of RAM. I think 32 has kind of been the standard for a long time now, but I do a lot of astrophotography processing on my computer, and I recently had to upgrade it to 64 gigs of RAM, and I have seen a big difference. So highly recommend that. As far as graphics cards, like I say, highly CPU bound PixInsight is, but there are other applications that we'll use that will utilize a graphics card. I'm an NVIDIA guy. I know AMD makes some great cards these days, but I would probably say, go with a 30 or 40 series if you can, 40 series card. And I would say, 4060 at a minimum. I wouldn't go any lower than that, like a 4060, 4070, or 4080. I have a 4070 Ti graphics card personally. And then a 800 watt to 1000 watt power supply. There's actually a great website called PC Part Picker that you can go in and plug all the things that you say, I want to get this processor with this RAM and this CPU or blah, 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 blah. And if you plug all the parts into it, it'll tell you what does and does not work for the build. So that's an awesome resource to utilize. So that's just kind of my heads up to you if I were building a new PC for astrophotography use, processing, etc. Same thing kind of applies to a laptop. I would just look for one. 64 gigs on a laptop's kind of asking a lot. I think 32 gigs would be fine on a laptop. 16 would be pushing it. I wouldn't really recommend that. You could get away with it for sure, but I would highly recommend 32 in this day and age. And then again, Ryzen 7 or Intel i7, 13th or 14th gen would be my recommendation. So beyond PixInsight, there are a lot of other programs that you can use depending on your use case. The first one that I ever used was Deep Sky Stacker. So it's strictly a stacking program. So it's really not made for post-processing, but it's rather the pre-processing stage where we're just kind of stacking all of our photos together. It's still free. It's a great tool. It's got a really awesome comet mode that I actually recently utilized when we were photographing C2023A3 recently. Deep Sky Stacker actually has a awesome built-in comet mode that you can check a couple of buttons and it will keep your stars sharp and your comet sharp. So it takes a little bit longer to do the processing. And don't ask me what kind of voodoo it does in the background, because usually you kind of pick one or the other. You're either going to get star trails and a sharp comet, or you're going to get sharp stars and a fuzzy comet that tends to drag out a little bit. But it's got the voodoo in it now, where it can do both with the same images. So very, very cool piece of software there. Afterwards, when you're done with deep sky stacker, you still have to do, the stretching of the image and the actual post processing. I think when a lot of people were using just deep sky stacker prior to PixInsight becoming as big as it is, they would generally go into Photoshop afterwards and stretch their images there. I don't really recommend that these days. I would highly recommend either Astro Pixel Processor or PixInsight over Photoshop for post-processing, just because they are just leagues easier to deal with, or Serial. I forgot to mention Serial, than actually manually stretching an image in Photoshop, which is easy to mess up and does require a lot of learning. Photoshop is a very, very, very deep application that you can get lost in. And honestly, I just don't think the results necessarily justify the amount of work that you have to put into it. That's not to say you can't get amazing results with Photoshop, because you absolutely can. If you're willing to take the time to learn, how it works, how to stretch images within it, how to set black points, white points, etc., you can get amazing results. And it even has some cool plugins that you can use. One of the ones I was guilty of using early on in my astrophotography journey was the Star Spikes plugin, which is something that I think we all kind of have a little bit of a chuckle at. We see a lot of new folks use it. Anytime that I'm on a like Reddit or Facebook and I see you can, not to be insulting or anything, but you can usually tell like a beginner image from somebody who's been doing it for a few years, and it's got the big star spikes all over the image. You're like, yep, I know what you did. You downloaded the Star Spikes plugin for Photoshop. So, but it is cool to use. And if you keep it classy and keep the spikes to a minimum, it can add a little bit of touch of uniqueness to your image. If you're going for more artistry than scientific approach. Usually we get star spikes from using specific types of telescopes, and that's not something that you would see in typical refractor scopes, which are extremely popular in astrophotography these days. But people like to add them in post-processing because it looks neat to have spikes on a star, et cetera, et cetera. So Deep Sky Stacker, though, very, very cool program. I mentioned Astro Pixel Processor. That would be kind of the before you get into PixInsight, but you're willing to spend some money. That's where APP falls, in my opinion. It's much easier to work with than PixInsight. It's got a super easy step-by-step process that kind of holds your hand at, step one, upload your files. Step two, let's register the files. Step three, and you literally just click start on each of those steps, and it kind of does everything for you, which is super nice. Another advantage, it costs a little bit less up front. You can lease it for just 1 year, and I think that's like $60 or $70 to lease it for a year. They also obviously offer to sell you a permanent license, but that costs significantly more. It's a couple $100. But again, if you're just getting started and you want to kind of keep your upfront cost to a minimum, that would be an excellent option. Now, beyond those is where you start getting into the interesting software that I mentioned earlier. Sequence Generator Pro, man, I can't say enough about that software. I may have mentioned it earlier, but it is amazing software for doing Milky Way photography. So, for example, when I was at the, at the observatory last week, I took quite a few Milky Way images while I was out there, and Sequence Generator Pro, also often referred to as Sequitur, which is just Sequence Generator Pro kind of squished together, gave me excellent results. So if you're using something like a 14 millimeter lens or even a 16 or even 24, but wide angle lenses, Sequence Generator Pro is just a super, super awesome tool. It's free. It's very, very good. Again, I really can't speak highly enough of it. Something that's kind of next door to Sequitur that I very recently discovered, but is a very, very cool piece of software that I also used on one of my images from last week, is an app called StarStax, and that's STAX. And it's actually on I think version 0.71. So they're not quite to a 1.0. But I believe it's still under active development, and it is really cool star trails software. So if you've ever wanted to take an image of star trails and have software kind of do all the work for you as far as stacking it together, it can even fill in gaps. So like, for example, if you are taking, let's say, 30-second exposures over and over and over again, and you're using a built-in intervalometer on your camera, you know that it might be 1 to 3 seconds before that next exposure starts again automatically. And when you get home and look at your stacked images, you might notice teeny tiny little gaps between your stars, and Star Stacks will actually fill those gaps in for you automatically, which is super duper cool. I actually used it on something. It's not like the most technical image I've ever taken as far as like noise quality and that sort of thing, but definitely one of the cooler images I think I've taken in quite some time. I hooked up my Canon R5 from the observatory, put it on the tripod, put it on a ball head, and then I pointed it straight up. So straight up towards the zenith, which is the highest point in the night sky if you look directly overhead. And I put my 7.5 millimeter TT Artisans f2 fisheye lens on my R5. And that lens with a full frame camera will capture the entire night sky and nearly the entire tree line around you as well. So when you're looking at the image afterwards, it is very, very cool because you can literally see the whole tree line around you. In fact, I posted that image to the Astrocast Facebook page recently, so I would highly encourage you to go check that out if you'd like to see it. And what I did was I was taking, I want to say 30-second exposures, and I did it for maybe about an hour or so. And then I put all of the photos in star stacks. And it wasn't a super long trail because, again, it was only about an hour at an extremely wide focal length, about as wide as you can get. But it really made me want to go back and do an all-nighter and then maybe wait until 3 months later and then do it again, and then wait 3 months later and do it again, and see if I can get kind of the entire circle, if you will, of a star trailing in the night sky. And it just super cool results. I was kind of shocked to see how, everything was moving around the, Polaris. Obviously, you can see everything circling in that way. But then when you look in the southern part of the sky, you can see everything circling kind of on the opposite side. And then it plays a little bit of a trick on your mind because you're looking at a flat 2D image, but it's the entire 360 degrees dome, 180 degree dome around you. And you have to kind of like remember that if you folded it together, how everything would track, et cetera. But anyway, look at the image, look closely at it if you want to see what I'm kind of talking about. And again, Star Stacks was super easy to use to get those results, and I thoroughly enjoyed using it. So very, very, very cool application there. There's also a whole world of planetary software out there. Now, I personally haven't really got into planetary imaging yet. It is something that I definitely want to do. I would love to get like a, Edge HD large Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope and get amazing photos of Jupiter and Saturn and Venus and everything else. But I'm not quite there yet, but I have used the software many times for lunar imaging. So if I'd take Martin earlier, for example, he could take his camera and, put that 75 to 300 millimeter lens on there and then extend it all the way out to 300 millimeters and then take shots of the moon. You'd have to get the right exposure length, which would probably be 1/60th of a second. I'm just throwing a number out there at, F, whatever your lowest F stop is, and then kind of adjust it from there to get the exposure right on the moon. But anyway, if you take, let's say 500 shots of the moon, and then you put them through pre-processing software, it can actually automatically align everything to the center of the frame. It can do debayering and color correction. And the software that I always use for that is PIP. So that's PIPP, and that's Planetary Image Pre-Processing, is what it stands for. And that's just, again, awesome software, works great for lunar, planetary, etc. Highly recommend that. If you use PIP, there's another application that kind of goes hand in hand with it, and that would be AutoStackert. So those two I kind of always use in combination. So PIP is what I do first, and then AutoStackert is what I do after. In fact, before I do PIP, I usually have to convert my files because they're Canon RAW files, which I believe are .cr3 files, and I usually have to convert them. There's lots of different applications you can use, but PIP can read a lot of different types of video files and imaging files, etc. But sometimes you might have to convert your images before putting them into PIP. But anyway, afterwards you use AutoStackert, and that actually does the stacking for you and then can bring out all of the details. So if you ever wanted to do a mineral moon shot, for example, you could, use a tracking mount, point it at the moon, take 1,000 shots of the moon, and then you could use PIP and then say, I want the best 25% of those shots, and then let it pull out 250 images, send those to AutoStackert. It will stack them for you. And then after that, I would bring it out to Lightroom personally. I still, I pay for the Adobe suite along with, PixInsight is a full-time license for now. Hopefully it stays that way. But I do pay for, recurring every app that Adobe offers. I think it's like $60 a month still, and I'm paying for that. If you would like to help support the show, feel free to visit patreon.com/the Astrocast. And after using PIP, you can go into Lightroom and then start tweaking settings, and that will allow you to really bring out the mineral moon, if you will. You can adjust contrast, saturation. Adobe has some unique to Lightroom features that you can adjust that really can bring out more depth in your planetary images. So while I'm on Lightroom, I would just mention to you that after I use PixInsight for my deep sky astrophotography, I always send it to Lightroom afterwards. Lightroom is where I always do my finishing touches, regardless of what the image is. So like, for example, the last deep sky shot that I got when I was at the observatory last week was of the Pleiades. I thought it came out very good. I got about 4 hours of exposure on it. And after processing everything in PixInsight and using a bunch of different, tools, both paid and free within PixInsight, I sent it out to Lightroom afterwards. And that's where I always do my final tweaks. And Lightroom is just an excellent tool for kind of mastering your photos. I think once you do that after PixInsight, you will have a hard time going back to just using PixInsight. Now, the downside there is obviously Adobe's not giving it away for free, and they certainly aren't allowing you to purchase a permanent license anymore, which really stinks. I used to love being able to own Photoshop, but those days are long gone. I will say they do offer an excellent student discount Adobe program. I used to have a .edu email address, long story for a different night. But while I had that, I was able to get it for, I want to say it was just $20 per month for the entire Adobe suite. So, Premiere Pro, Lightroom, Photoshop, After Effects, all of it, you could get for just $25 a month with the .edu email address, $20 a month. So if you have a .edu email address and you are interested in getting the Adobe suite, definitely check into that. If you have a family member, perhaps that goes to college, maybe ask them if they'll do that for you. You can also do color grading in Lightroom and Photoshop. So, if you ever find that you've got, like, let's say, for example, I really stretch the heck out of an image in PixInsight, and I love how the nebula looks, but then I notice on the outside of the actual nebula, maybe I've got like some green or purple artifacts that are showing up. And I'm like, dang, like my nebula looks perfect, but what is that color? I really don't want that. You can very easily in Lightroom kind of select that color with your mouse and then turn the saturation all the way off. So it just removes all color from it, which is super, super nice. So anyway, Adobe Suite, very, very awesome tool. Glad that I'm able to afford it, but understand everybody can't. There is GIMP, which is an awesome, free version. It's like an open source version of Photoshop is the best way that I can describe it. It does got a little bit more of a learning curve than something like Lightroom. Lightroom is very user friendly and it's easy to pick up because it's just sliders essentially that you adjust. GIMP, a little bit more complicated, a little bit more like Photoshop, but again, very, very powerful tool that you can use for your post processing or mastering of photos, whatever you want to call it, color correction, those sorts of things. Would highly recommend that. Let's see, smaller, but equally worth mentioning, PhD2. This is a piece of software that is just absolutely indispensable to astrophotographers who use auto guiding. It's kind of the auto guiding software. I know the ASI Air's auto guiding is completely based off of PhD2. And I think there's some controversy around the ASI Air for using PhD2's code, but not mentioning it anywhere. If any of you guys know the exact story behind that, I would love to hear it. Please feel free to email it to me at ruastrocast@gmail.com. Or if you know a video that explains it, send me the link. I know I've heard about that, but I've never actually done the research into finding out what the deal is there. But PhD2 is basically, it's called Push Here Dummy. That's what PhD2 stands for, because it's just push this button and it does the rest. And it really is as easy as that. For auto guiding, there are, different things that you can adjust within the software, like your exposure time and binning and, other little features that can kind of tweak things for you. But generally speaking, it just doesn't get easier than that for auto guiding. So thank goodness for PhD2. A couple of honorable mentions for software. Stuff that maybe I don't actually use all the time or haven't used lately, but definitely worth mentioning. I think Backyard EOS. This is one that I used to use, but haven't used in a long time. Martin, if you're still listening, this might be worth looking into for you because it's actually kind of an astrophotography centric tool for Canon cameras. And I believe there's actually a Backyard Nikon as well, Nikon application for Nikon cameras. But basically it helps with focus assistance, live view. It's got a planetary mode. It's got deep sky imaging tools built into it. It's a very, very cool application. APT, I mentioned that earlier, astrophotography tool. Obviously that's absolutely crucial. Fire capture is another planetary capture tool. I've never used it myself because again, I haven't done much planetary work, but I've heard that it is very good. I haven't actually checked it out myself. And then finally, one other piece of software, and it kind of is connected to a few others. Sorry, I bumped the mic there. K-Stars. K-Stars with the EKOS module. It's basically a Linux operating system that runs on a Raspberry Pi. It includes planetarium software. It's got a whole astrophotography suite, so polar alignment, auto guiding, focusing, plate solving, capturing images, etc. It can kind of do it all. In fact, Rick and Jeff, they use K-Stars to run their observatory. So if that tells you how powerful it is, they use it to run their whole observatory. I personally would use Nina before K-Stars, but that's because I'm a Windows user. I do got to say, if you're building an observatory, the beauty of something like K-Stars is that it runs on Linux. And if you know anything about Linux, you can actually kind of set it up exactly how you want, and then you can turn off all updates. So you can get it to a stable point where everything is working exactly how you want it. And Linux will allow you to say, okay, I want to keep it running in just this state, which means no restarts, no updates, no automatic anything unless you tell it to. And that is really the huge advantage. And obviously, if you're running an observatory, you do not want surprises, particularly if you're working remotely, because the last thing that you would want is to be running a Windows PC on Nina. And let's say that your roof automatically opens every night whenever clear skies are out. Well, what happens if it's 3 o'clock in the morning, you're imaging, and then Windows gets an automatic update and decides that it's going to restart your computer right then and there, which it often does. And then you don't know about it. The computer restarts, who knows? Maybe it does restart, maybe it doesn't, maybe it gets stuck on the login screen. And then your Dome software is no longer running. So if it sees that weather is upcoming, such as rain, it's not going to automatically close. I mean, that can be a nightmare scenario. And if you don't think about those types of things while you're building a remote observatory, that could be really, really bad for you. You could lose thousands and thousands of dollars of gear overnight because of something as simple as a Windows update. So I think really that's the ultimate power behind something like K-Stars, is just that it runs on Linux and it runs well. So there's also a software called Astro that I wanted to mention. That is kind of a pre-configured OS specifically for the Raspberry Pi, and it kind of bundles all the good astronomy and astrophotography stuff together, ND, K-Stars, and other AP tools. So would definitely recommend checking that out as well if you're wanting to run it on a Raspberry Pi. Now, if I'm running an actual full-time observatory, I would definitely recommend like a Nook at a minimum, if not a real desktop PC. But if you just want to try to check out K-Stars and see what it's like, and you have a Raspberry Pi at home and you want to, set it up and bring your telescope outside and have a look one night, absolutely highly recommend Astroberry for that. Boy, oh boy, have I said a mouthful today. We've been talking for nearly an hour and a half now, and I'm just so happy to be back and talking with you guys. I certainly don't mind having an extended episode where we got really deep on some astrophotography stuff, and expect more of this over the coming weeks. As we get into the winter season and more imaging becomes available to all of us because of the clear skies. If you're in the Northern Hemisphere, sorry if you're down south and you're getting into rainy season, but I do expect to be talking more and more about astrophotography centric episodes. So definitely have that to look forward to. Let's see, what else do I want to talk about? I want to give you guys an update on one thing I think I mentioned on the show a few weeks back, that I had, I think it might have been the recommendation. It was a pre-order for Neil deGrasse Tyson's new book, which is Merlin's Tour of the Universe Retold. I actually got my copy in, and it is indeed autographed by Neil himself. So that is now my second autographed Neil deGrasse Tyson book, which is really, really cool. And I surely hope that he comes back to Charlotte to talk one day. Actually, speaking of live events, I've got quite a few coming up over the coming months. This next weekend, we actually have something really cool going on at the Raptor Center here in Charlotte, North Carolina. If you don't know, I'm a big birder, wildlife photographer, as well as astronomer. And I often go to the Raptor Center because I love hawks and birds of prey. They're just absolutely beautiful animals, and I love seeing them. And they do amazing work at the Raptor Center in rehabilitating these animals when they're injured. And whenever they can, they obviously release them back to the wild. And when they can't, they take great care and give them, the best life possible at the Raptor Center. But they have a special event once a year. They do 2 sessions once a year. So I guess technically twice a year they do it. But it's called Photo Wild. And they have a limited number of tickets to this because they don't want too many people to come because it can kind of ruin the experience. But essentially, it is for photographers only, and they allow you to get up close and personal with birds of prey. So hawks, owls, eagles, all of their birds, you're able to get kind of up close and personal with and have one-on-one time photographing the animals. Actually have that next weekend. So I'm extremely excited about that. I was so lucky to get a ticket because I heard about it. I knew that it was upcoming before the tickets were released. And the day of, I just completely spaced and forgot to buy the ticket. And by the time I remembered, I went and looked and they were all sold out. And I was so disappointed because I had been looking forward to that for so long. And I'm usually really good about, remembering to buy tickets or pre-orders, et cetera, those sorts of things. So I just, on a whim, I figured, what the heck, I might as well try. I emailed them and said, hey, I missed out, da, 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 da. I said, if anyone cancels on you, if you could put me on the wait list, I would just love a chance to go, just in case someone can't make it. I went to bed because I wrote that email really late at night that night. Little did I know, about 20 minutes later, I actually got a response from a person who worked for the Raptor Center. And they said, oh, what I'll do is I'll open up one more ticket for you. So if you go on the website, you'll see there's one more available. Just make sure to go grab it. I didn't check my email for like a whole nother day. And when I saw that, I nearly lost my mind. I was like, oh my God, she opened one up for me. And then I immediately thought somebody else probably bought it already, because again, this is an extremely popular event with a very, very limited number of tickets. But somehow it was still there. So nobody knew about it. And thank God no one had any like Google alerts set up to tell them if that page changed. And I was able to rush in at the last moment and get that ticket. So very much looking forward to Photo Wild coming up next weekend. So recommendations. Let's see. I've got one recommendation, and it's not out yet, but it will be coming out, I think, on the 24th. Let me go check. Sorry, not the 24th. It'll be the 19th. It's just 2024. So I always associate that with the 24th for some reason. But anyway, November 19th, Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 will be releasing. And if you're like me and you're a little bit of a flight sim nerd, this is very exciting, because the incredible piece of software that they released in 2020, which was the first flight simulator in well over a decade, was absolutely mind-blowing in terms of scale, because they had pretty much mapped the entire planet Earth, so you could literally fly from anywhere to anywhere. But there were challenges with that software. For one, it was incredibly large. I mean, you're talking hundreds and hundreds of gigabytes, and they've slimmed down Flight Simulator 2024 hugely by using streaming. So it will be pulling down a lot of data. You'll probably want to have a very fast internet connection with certainly unlimited data if you want to use this, but it brings it down to 80 gigabytes. And from everything that I have seen and read so far, this is not just like a simple update. This is a new game, and it is huge from everything I've read. It's got a whole career mode now, so you can start as just a trainee learning to fly a Cessna 150, and then work your way up to passenger pilot. So it's going to be really, really cool. Fly fighter jets, fight fires with planes, etc. Looking very, very much forward to that. Again, November 19th is when it should be launching. Last time they did a little bit of a early launch. If you had pre-ordered the, Ultra edition or whatever of the game, I wouldn't recommend doing that. I wish I would have just waited, because I spent over, I think I want to say $100 to get that version. It will be available on Game Pass if you have Microsoft Game Pass, both for Xbox and for PC. So that'll be available on the 19th. So something very, very much that I am looking forward to. And if you've ever been interested in flight, I would highly recommend that you check that out as well. And I think that is just about it, guys. So my other recommendation to you is going to be to go outside and look at the stars. This is a really special time of year. I know I said it the last time we talked, but I will reiterate to you, you can see the Milky Way and the winter constellations all on the same night right now. That's pretty incredible if you think about it. So if you get a chance, make it out to a dark sky site, bring some nice warm clothes, throw some toe warmers or hand warmers in your bag so you can keep them hands nice and warm while you're out looking at the night sky. Enjoy Orion rising, enjoy seeing the Pleiades. Enjoy seeing the Hyades, seeing Taurus, seeing Cassiopeia. All of these amazing sights are finally back and upon us, and we're getting into what is my absolute favorite time of the year for astronomy. So I hope that you guys are enjoying it just as much as I am. And if you have photos that you've taken recently, please, please, please feel free to email them to me or just tag hashtag the Astrocast. I actually did a search for the Astrocast last week and saw quite a few photos. I try to comment on all of them. So if you post to like Instagram, for example, with hashtag the Astrocast, I promise you I will check your photo out and I will leave a comment. Also, feel free to follow us on Instagram and Facebook. If you go to Facebook and search for the Astrocast, you'll find us there. And then you can find my personal Facebook profile, which is set up as a digital creator as well. So you can follow me there if you want to kind of follow along with all the other stuff that I'm doing. So that is going to pretty much do it for this week, guys. I think we've gone nearly an hour and a half. We got really deep on some awesome astrophotography stuff, which is super fun to do. I'm glad we were able to do that again, because I know that it's been a little while. And it's good to start talking AP again with you guys. So thank you so much for tuning in this week. It's new moon. Get out there, get under the stars, and I hope that you enjoy it. Maybe Captain Cumulus will pay you a visit if you've got cloudy conditions. But thank you so much for tuning in this week to the Astrocast. I am your host, Rue, and as always, clear skies.